Hello and welcome to my study. Coach Kaspa is my name, and in this course, we'll go over every important thing that you need to know about the Italian opening. And at the end of this course, I will also recommend what else you can do if black does not respond with e5 on move 1. But of course, those are merely suggestions that are not part of our Italian course. I'm just gonna do you a favor. Anyways, now let's agree on one thing before I take you into my study. You are not here to learn how to memorize moves. Don't be that guy. You are not going to watch this whole video at once as if you were watching a movie. No, you are not here to be entertained with quick traps in order to checkmate your opponents very fast. Nope, because that won't improve your chess understanding. And I assume that you are a beginner or an intermediate level player with some basic chess knowledge. And good news, even if you are an advanced chess player, some chapters of this course will also be a nice revision and an addition to your Italian repertoire. Alright, so why are you here? You are here to build a solid foundation in the Italian opening and gain a full understanding of every move. And I can assure you to say that after becoming an Italian professional, you will be able to make mistakes and break the rules, but you will still be able to spot your weaknesses and fix them along the way, which is very important. This follows Kasparov's quote that says, to be good at chess, you need to learn how to apply the basic principles, but to be great at chess, you need to learn how to break those principles and be able to recover from the worst. And that's the foundation that you are here to build. Before I start, the other most important and unique feature of my course is the chess advice and memorable hints, including other chess principles that I give you throughout the variations, which are worth noting. And this is why I encourage you to take some notes, watch this video in chapters, and practice through the moves using Lichess or on chess.com after each chapter. So the URL to this Studies Master PGN is somewhere in the description down below. Now let's get started. Welcome to chapter 1 of my Italian course. In this chapter, I will only show you our first 6 opening moves of our Italian opening prep. And I will also give you some key takeaways of this course with respect to what you should expect. So of course you are playing this with white pieces and you're supposed to start with e4. Then you can see the top played move is pawn to e5, which most of your opponents will play. So you go knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn. They'll defend it with knight c6 and then bishop c4. This is called the Italian game, you guys. So you see the first pieces to develop are our king side pieces, which is good. And when you look into the Lichess database or even in the Masters database, you can see that bishop c5, the Giuoco Piano, is by far the top played move in this position, the silent game or the quiet game, and you will see how quiet this opening is. Now hold on, write this down. Starting position should be the Giuoco Piano, which is what you're seeing on the board right now, where black is over controlling the d4 square with his knight and his bishop, yet you're only controlling the d4 square with your king's knight, which is not good. So that is why we always want to play pawn to c3 on move 4. So this is our key Italian pawn move. Write that down. c3 prevents any knight d4 nonsense on knight b4. Again, you can see they play knight to f6. To be honest, it doesn't even matter which move they start with, pawn to d6 or knight to f6. The thing is, at some point they are going to develop their king's knight, preparing to castle short. I'll explain all these in detail, by the way. Knight to f6 attacks your undefended pawn on e4. So how do you defend this pawn immediately? You play pawn to d3. These are the Italian pawns that you always want to maintain at all times. Very good. Now black may castle short, or at some point they may play pawn to d6, maybe paving way for their light squared bishop, and this is where we're going to start from. So after pawn to d6, I want you to notice how our pieces are sitting. We have only developed 2 minor pieces so far, the knight and the bishop, and most importantly, we haven't developed any of our queenside pieces, which is another key thing to remember. So we spent most of our time building a solid Italian center with these highlighted pawns. And it is in this position where most white players tend to play anything without following one single plan. They play castle short, they play h3, they play bishop e3, they play a4, just anything But I want you to forget about all these highlighted moves, you guys. What I want you to do on move 6 is to wait. So after pawn to d6, before developing any other piece such as the queen or the knight, we want to put our light squared bishop on b3. This is kind of a prophylactic move and I will explain. Now keep in mind, we haven't yet started. All these are just foundations that I'm giving you guys. So besides pawn to c3, bishop b3 is another key move in our Italian opening repertoire. So what are you going to learn from my Italian opening prep, you guys? Write this down. Number 1, move consistency, meaning we are more likely to play the same things, same moves over and over in different structures. Number 2, one consistent plan. We're only going to have one fixed plan to follow regardless of what black does. So sometimes move order doesn't really matter as long as we know what our plan is. Number 3, same piece destination. You will notice that the destination for our pieces will be the same. Number 4, live response flexibility. I like this because it discourages memorization. And this is what made me so good, you guys. My former coach told me that when you are playing in a tournament, the best you can do is to respond to current situations, not memorizing moves. In other words, just play what you see on the board. Use your mind. Solve what you see. Anyways, number 5, you're going to learn how to be creative. So that is art. You need to be a good chess artist to be able to draw very nice pictures on the board as compared to your opponent. So those are the 5 key takeaways from my Italian opening prep. Now let's move on. So after you play bishop b3, a prophylactic move, black has about 8 common responses that we are going to look at in this course, and we are going to start weeding out the bad ones first until we reach the best response for black. So basically speaking, when we play bishop b3, a waiting move, we are waiting for black to make some inaccuracies like bishop g4, take note of that, pawn to h6, and that as well. And finally, we can't wait to see black castle short. Another immediate blunder that we are going to start with is pawn to d5. You don't have to be afraid of this move. I'm going to cover that as well. I'm also going to show you what to do against bishop e6 and also a5, pawn to a6, and also if black tries to copy you with bishop b6. So those are the 8 responses that we're going to look at in this course. And of course, you can skip through chapters, but do that at your own risk. The rest of the chapters are so entertaining and educative. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Welcome to chapter 2 of my Italian course. In this chapter, I'm going to show you how the pawns move. One difference between beginners and advanced players lies deep in the pawn structure. This is why I want to start by explaining the Italian pawn structure. So the e-pawn will be developed on e4, and let's say black makes a move. You don't want to ever think of playing pawn to d3 before you play pawn to c3. So your next pawn move will always be pawn to c3. They make a random move, and this is when you want to play d3, because by now your pawn on e4 will be attacked by black's knight on f6 maybe, so you want to defend your e4 pawn with pawn to d3. And I call these 3 pawns the Italian center pawns. Let's say black makes a move. Oftentimes your opponent will play bishop g4, which will invite your 4th pawn move, h3. So most of the times we'll be playing h3 to chase black's light squared bishop away from g4, and that'll be done before we castle short. Mostly we won't be castling short early in our plan, so an early pawn to h3 is optional and not really necessary if black hasn't played bishop g4 or if they haven't castled short, whatever. So let's say black makes a random move. Now remember, we are not talking about pieces, it's all about the pawns in this chapter. Again, pawn to g4 is an aggressive way to begin an early kingside attack, especially if black has already castled short. But sometimes a4 will be useful to meet pawn to a5, not pawn to a6, only pawn to a5 by black. So for example, if black's bishop is on h5, g4 will be an aggressive way to go about that. Besides, the aim is to trade off our G pawn someday in order to open up the G file for our king's rook. You can see that. Remember that by this time, black has already castled short, so our center pawns will remain like this for quite so long. If need be, we'll begin our pawn break with d4, but that's not necessary once again. So pawn to g4 is an aggressive way of playing the Italian opening, and just like I said, a4 will sometimes be played, and let's say black makes a move. The b pawn is almost never touched until the end game. From here we can leave the pawns just like that and start playing chess, responding to white's current affairs. So I was just showing you how our Italian pawns move, not to say that we are not supposed to develop our pieces. No. This chapter was all about the pawns. So now that you know how our pawns move, we can move on to the next chapter. By the way, pawn to a4 is optional. You don't really have to play it unless black plays pawn to a5. So this is one thing to keep in mind. Let's move on. Welcome to chapter 3 of my Italian course, where I want to introduce to you our 7 commandments or our 7 basic rules in the Italian game. This is gonna be fun, and I want you guys to take a piece of paper or your notebook, write this down, because you're going to be thinking about these commandments at all times. Number 1, we first create the Italian opening position, which is this position that you're seeing on the board, you guys. e4, knight to f3, then bishop c4. Now waiting for black to play the Giuoco piano with bishop c5. So you first create the Italian position, which is basically what you're seeing on the board right now. Commandment number 2, we maintain our Italian center pawns, the c3 pawn and the e4 pawn, until the end game. You will notice that sometimes our d pawn will be traded off with black's d pawn, so our d pawn will become the e pawn in the long run. If they do nothing about that, just maintain your Italian center pawns as highlighted. Number 3, we replace castle short with queen e2. Now, I'm not saying you should play queen e2 on move 4 or on move 5. No, this may come later after building your Italian center pawns. So in other words, do not think of castling short before black castles short. So you will only be castling short after black castles short, and you will see why. So you simply replace castling short with queen e2. So always remember that queen e2 will also be protecting your e4 pawn. That will be good. Rule number 4, we delay pawn to h3 until black moves his light squared bishop once, or if they castle short. So you can take note of that as well. And again, I'm not saying pawn to h3 is a blunder or it's a mistake. Nope, we just want to have a consistent plan and know what we are doing at every stage of the game. Rule number 5, pawn to g4 only makes sense if black has already castled short while you haven't. So pawn to g4 may come later, especially if black's light squared bishop is on h5 and black has already castled short. So that's an aggressive way of playing the Italian opening. We'll see how that works. Rule number 6, no dark squared bishop development until the end game. Yeah, just like in the stone wall, we're going to hurt our dark squared bishop a little bit, but the difference in the Italian opening is that this diagonal will be open, so our dark squared bishop will be working on its initial square. So don't just be bothered about developing it. Anyways, rule number 7, the last commandment, the target square for our queen's knight will be g3 or sometimes f5. f5 will always be our juicy square to aim for. And well, to be honest, the knight that usually sits on f5 is our king's knight. So our queen's knight will mostly be on g3 supporting our king's knight on f5. And here is the bonus rule for you guys. Only pawn to a5 by black equals pawn to a4. So we only want to play a4 if black plays a5. If they play pawn to a6, we don't give a damn. We don't respond to whatever is going on the queen side. We just maintain our pawn structure as is. In most cases, our a pawn will be defending our light squared bishop on b3. So just leave the pawn structure as it is looking unless black plays pawn to a5. That's when you can play a4. Alright, so now that you have written all our 7 commandments on a piece of paper or in your notebook, it is time for us to look at the plan, the game plan that we are always going to be playing. Welcome to chapter 4 of our Italian course. So now we look at the game plan combining the moves of our pieces and the pawns. So of course you begin with e4, and whatever black does, our second move will be knight f3, following one of our opening principles that say knights go first before bishops. A random move by black, you now go bishop c4, which introduces the Italian game. A random move by black, and once again you don't think of playing pawn to d3. Remember what I said? Our first key Italian move is pawn to c3. I like calling it the Ponziani move. The main purpose of c3 is to make black's knight on c6 to look useless. Because normally after knight c6, black usually wants to put his knight on d4 or on b4. So pawn to c3 prevents that. A random move by black, and by this time black will play knight to f6, attacking your undefended e4 pawn. So you defend it with pawn to d3. Which will automatically create our desirable starting position and the perfect pawn structure to always maintain until death. Pawns speak a language that beginners don't really understand. Let me explain. You can see the direction of our pawns and where they are pointing, which tells you to say there will be no game happening on the queen side. Our attack will be on the king side as highlighted. So that's what the direction of pawns communicate to you. Anyways, a random move by black. See, this is now move 5, yet we haven't developed any of our queenside pieces, but that's the idea. Now the key move to remember in the opening stage after you create your Italian pawn structure is bishop b3. Bishop b3 is more of a waiting move, also known as a prophylactic move, which serves 3 important purposes that we are going to see in a moment. The final destination of our light squared bishop will most of the times be the c2 square, like somewhere in the middle game, not right now in the opening stage, no. At best, we can always leave our light squared bishop on b3 as long as we want. It does a great job of pinning the f7 pawn to the king on g8, especially after black has already castled short. A random move by black. Now that our bishop is defended by our a2 pawn, and we already have our Italian center pawn structure, this is where our real game begins. Just like I mentioned in the intro of this video, white's mistakes to look out for always is bishop g4, castle short, and pawn to h6. These are the moves that are going to enable you to play pawn to h3, and you start your pawn to g4, kingside hand, and go on with your attack. Sometimes, if you don't want to play pawn to g4, don't worry, you can always play it safe, and I'm going to show you in a minute how that goes. Now, once again, remember, we replace castle short with queen e2. Either queen e2 or knight bd2 is playable here, but I like advising beginners and intermediate level players to begin with queen e2 before knight d2, because it is easier for beginners to forget about this move. So queen e2 is such a big deal, you guys. Anyways, let's say a random move by black. And remember, the final destination of our queen's knight will be g3 in most cases, and sometimes the juicy f5 square. So you go knight bd2. By the way, this is all happening before you castle short, so that's why you have knight f1. Depending on the situation, it is here where you can play pawn to h3, especially if black has played bishop g4, pinning our knight to our queen at any point in time. So knight f1, you want to go knight g3 next, or maybe pawn to g4 depending on what type of a player you are. So let's say a random move by black. This time bishop g4, you go h3, let's say bishop h5. It's up to you to go aggressive with the immediate pawn to g4, and later you put your knight on g3 and castle short, or you simply play knight g3, which is even safer because your queen's knight will now be supporting your king's knight on f5 later on. And this is how your position is going to look like if you play this correctly. I mean, professional chess players say that if you can manage to plant your knight on f5, then you have won half the battle in chess. So if black takes your knight on f5 with any of his minor pieces, you will take back with your g knight, and that's what we call reinforcement. Up to now, you can see we haven't touched our dark squared bishop, and we haven't yet castled short. So now this is the time we can castle short, put our king to safety. So once again, you don't have to memorize these moves. The key in every opening is just to know where the pieces go and when to play those pieces. But when to play those pieces may depend on the current board situation. For example, somewhere in the middle game, you can play bishop g5 to provoke the h6 weakness, meaning we only play bishop g5 when black has already castled short and only in the middle game or somewhere in the end game. Give it a chance. If pawn to h6, we can safely retreat our dark squared bishop on e3 in case of any attacks on our dark squared bishop. It depends with the situation on the board once again. And after a random move, now that all our minor pieces and the queen are well developed, we can quickly centralize our rooks. As per rule of thumb, our queen's rook always sits on c1 because in most endgames we will always trade our c pawn, leaving the c file open, and that will be good for our queen's rook. That's why we put it on c1. While on the other hand, our king's rook will always sit on e1 to constantly protect the e4 pawn in case our queen goes away. Just to be safe, avoid putting your rooks on d1. This can be useful to retreat our light squared bishop or maybe our queen, so just avoid putting any of your rooks on d1. So this is the end of our game plan, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are cool to move to the next chapter. Welcome to chapter 5, where we'll be discussing the prohibited moves. Now this is another part where you would want to take your notebook and write the following 10 prohibited moves that you are not supposed to play in the Italian game. So number 1, no castling short before black castles short. So wait for black to castle short, that's when you can think of castling short. That is not optional. Number 2, no dark squared bishop development until endgame. So forget about bishop g5 pins. I know you like this, but it's time to change and move on. No bishop g5. Your bishop will be developed somewhere in the late middle game stage or endgame. Number 3, no pawn to h3 before black plays bishop g4 or before black castles short. So we only want to play pawn to h3 after black plays bishop g4 or after they castle short. Of course, this is optional because pawn to h3 can sometimes be a prophylactic move as well, but just don't rush with pawn to h3. Let black pin you. That's when you can play pawn to h3. It can also come in the middle game, but anyways. Number 4, no knight c3. So in the Italian game, since we are playing the Giuoco Pianissimo, a very quiet game, we should completely forget about knight to c3. Our queen's knight will mostly be developed on d2, then put it on f1, g3 until f5, or sometimes just on g3. So just forget about knight c3 completely. Number 5, no bishop takes e6. Don't trade off your light squared bishop with black's light squared bishop on e6. Let me explain. In most cases, your Italian bishop that you develop on c4 will be challenged by black's light squared bishop after black plays bishop e6, but don't be tempted to take on e6 as that may just open up the f file for black's king's rook. So don't take on e6 if black plays bishop e6. The best you can do is to play bishop b3 or just leave your bishop on b3. Let black take you to help you open up the a file. So no bishop takes e6. Number 6, no e takes f5. Remember from our 7 commandments, we always want to make sure that our so-called Italian pawns, the c3 pawn and the e4 pawn, are maintained that way. We don't want to take on f5 because that will open up the e file for black to push his pawn to e4. We don't want that. We want to close the center. That was number 6. Number 7, equally, no taking on d5. So no e takes d5. You always want to maintain your e4 pawn and stop black from getting into your territory. So that's why you always maintain your e4 pawn together with your c pawn. Number 8, no bishop e3. To challenge black's bishop on c5. I know this is quite a temptation. It's not a blunder, but we just want to keep things simple and have a consistent plan. That's why we are looking at these, you guys. Most of these moves are not blunders and mistakes. We just want to have a consistent plan. What I'm giving you is a straightforward and one fixed opening repertoire. So just follow this. Just because black's dark squared bishop is on c5, you don't always want to challenge it by playing bishop e3, wanting to trade, unless you are prepared for it. But there's no need for you to play bishop e3 to challenge bishop c5. It's optional, but that's just a waste of time. Anyways, number 9, no pawn to g4 before black castles short. Number 10, no pawn to a4 if black plays a6, unless they play pawn to a5. That's when you can play pawn to a4. But however, in most cases, black plays pawn to a6, so you don't have to play pawn to a4, just leave your pawn structure like that. So those are the 10 basic moves that you want to avoid in the Italian opening. I know they sound to be a lot, they sound to be too much, but remember, this is something that you only get used to over time. As long as you are playing the same thing over and over, you learn by mistakes, these things will be in you automatically. And I can guarantee you that by the end of this course, these rules will be automatically in your head. You won't even have to remember them. Or to help you visualize all these, just screenshot this and save it somewhere in your phone. When you're moving, you're looking at this image, that will help you to remember these things, but I already know them, so good for me. Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter. Welcome to chapter 6, the official beginning of our course. So now that we have the foundation, let's look at some practical moves to know how actual people play the Italian opening. So you begin with e4, they go e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian. Once again, forget about castling short, remember, until somewhere around move 17 or move 20 in the middle game. The move that we are looking for is bishop c5, the Giuoco Piano. Now, once again, you remember from our commandments that black is now over controlling the d4 square. So what do you want to do? You play pawn to c3 to stop knight d4 or knight b4. And again, as you can see in the Lichess database, knight to f6 is what everybody plays. It doesn't matter even if they play pawn to d6 here or pawn to h6. What happens is that these moves transpose back to what we are going to see. Knight to f6 anyways. That attacks our undefended pawn on e4, so we need to defend it with pawn to d3. And lo, that's how we create our 3 Italian center pawns. Now hold on, if you didn't miss any of my previous chapters, you already know that most black players here play pawn to d6, after which you are supposed to play no any other piece apart from bishop b3, a prophylactic move. But in this chapter, which is chapter 6, we are looking at black's d5 response, which is the early d5 response. I just want to show you guys why you shouldn't be afraid of pawn to d5. If you look at the Masters database, you find that nobody plays pawn to d5 here. But when you look into the Lichess database, you see that pawn to d5 is the 4th played move, which is a blunder after pawn to d5 before you play bishop b3. This is the only case where you can take on d5 with your pawn. Because after knight takes d5, because black did not give you time to put your bishop on b3, now you can take advantage of this vacancy, and that's why you develop your queen, and black will end up losing a free pawn for nothing here. Your queen and bishop is attacking the lonely knight on d5. For example, if black plays the top played move, which is a mistake, bishop e6, defending the knight 2 times, well, the thing is that just hangs the b7 pawn, and now you simply walk away with a free pawn. So that's why pawn to d5 is such a bad move by black. Let's say if they play the top played move knight a5, double attacking your queen and bishop, they'll lose a free piece from here after queen b5 check. For example, c6, they are indirectly defending their knight, so you can just take the bishop, and from here they are just down a piece. I mean, even if black chooses not to play knight a5 after you take their free pawn on b7, and let's say they play knight ce7, well, we still have queen b5 check, and on the next move we are going to win their dark squared bishop. That's the main problem. So maybe they can try to play knight de7 instead of knight ce7. But again, if you look at the position very carefully while exercising some patience, which I always recommend, you can see that their light squared bishop is not sitting well. So you take it and make them double up these pawns along the e file, which is very bad. First of all, you are up a pawn with a better pawn structure. You should go on to simplify this game, trade pieces but not pawns, according to our middle game principles, and you will be able to win the end game. So this all just shows you that pawn to d5 on move 5 by black is such a very bad move. So black should just play d6, allowing you to play your prophylactic move bishop b3, your waiting move, waiting for black to blunder with bishop g4, castle short or pawn to h6. Again, it makes no sense for black to waste a move by moving his d pawn again let's say pawn to d5. Since we don't have queen b3 this time, this would be the best time to develop our queen on e2, which will support the e4 pawn. For example, after d takes e4, you can see how we still maintain our Italian center pawns, the c3 pawn and the pawn on e4. Our c3 pawn will forever guard the d4 square and the b4 square. So this is very good. Again, if you look at our 7 commandments, you will remember that rule number 2 says we have to maintain our Italian center pawns until the end game. So now that your opponent has developed all his minor pieces, the last piece they would love to develop is their light squared bishop, and they'll mostly develop it on g4 to make it more active. And once again, don't think of castling short. Black hasn't castled short, okay? So this is the best time to play pawn to h3. They're going to play bishop h5. If they take, you take back with your queen. If they play bishop h5, what I don't recommend is to go pawn to g4 right away. Again, remember from our 7 commandments, rule number 5 says g4 only makes sense if black has already castled short while you haven't. Yeah, the thing is g4 is not a blunder, but we want to keep things consistent, you remember. So just go knight bd2. So instead of showing your cards too early with g4 that you don't want to castle short, you better be playing moves that complete your opening stage. Knight bd2 is the best example. So wait for black to castle. If black doesn't castle, just keep on developing your pieces on the most active squares and improving your position. They are most likely going to castle. Now this is when you have an option to go aggressive with pawn to g4 now that black has castled short. Or even better, you play safe with knight f1. So you see how I'm switching between moves. You don't have to memorize moves. You only need to know where your pieces go. So knight g3 is coming. They play bishop g6. That's the top played move. Be patient. Black is double attacking your e4 pawn, which is only defended by your queen. So that's why you play knight g3, well justified. You can see knight h5 is the top played move once again, after which you can just simplify the game. This is the best way of playing chess. Keys, KISS, keep it so simple. After bishop takes h5, this is when you can go pawn to g4 if you want. This becomes all possible because you didn't rush to castle short like your opponent did earlier. Therefore, g4 makes a lot of sense if black has already castled short while you haven't. You can also play g4 even if you are castled anyways. Bishop g6. Look at this. We can even go h4 here. Anything we do which is sensible, as long as we don't have any weaknesses. We want to trap black's light squared bishop, so they play h5. This is okay, followed by this and this or this. But if you become patient, you'll be able to find knight g5 here, because you have all the time in this world to take on h5, and if they take, you just continue advancing your pawn. Your knight is defended by the dark squared bishop. So you see, we haven't developed our dark squared bishop, but it's still doing its job while on c1. So pawn to h5, bishop h7, we go h6, let's say g6. These are all possibilities. Now wait a second. Give this position to me with a better tactical vision, which I developed after months of solving puzzles. I will be able to find knight takes f7 sacrifice, because I know if rook takes, I can simply take that rook. And after king takes, I have queen c4 check. And from here, I'll just be up an exchange. So because this bishop on c5 was not protected, I was able to spot knight takes f7 sacrifice. Anyways, so this was all in the d5 response. I mean, if black rushes out with pawn to d5, or let's say they play d6, and then on the next move they play pawn to d5, remember just to go queen e2 to maintain your center pawns. And from here, you just remember where the pieces go and chess will be playing itself. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go! Welcome to chapter 7 of our Italian opening. In this chapter, we'll be looking at the bishop g4 line, and just for disclosure, I'm using Garry Kasparov's game to demonstrate how this can go. So you begin with e4, they play e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian game once again, Then black plays the top played move bishop c5, and again you remember not to play pawn to d3, that's not in your vocabulary, you go pawn to c3. Over controlling your d4 square, and again black plays the top played move knight to f6, maybe preparing to castle shot or whatever. So black's knight is attacking our e4 pawn, we need to protect it. And remember in the previous chapter we looked at pawn to d5, where we just take the pawn on d5 and play queen b3, black will lose the free pawn. But in this chapter, we are looking at the bishop g4 line, and just like I mentioned, we are following the game between Garry Kasparov and Achnelo Wiros, I think. By the way, I should mention to say after knight to f6 and pawn to d3, this game officially becomes the Giuoco Pianissimo from the Giuoco Piano. So the Giuoco Pianissimo means a very silent game or a very quiet game. This is where we play very slow moves with a lot of maneuvers. So in this game, black played the top played move pawn to d6, then Kasparov did not develop any other piece apart from his Italian pieces, so he just went on to play bishop b3, which is a prophylactic move. Now let me explain this move. Bishop b3 serves three purposes. One, it is a waiting move, a prophylactic move. Two, you are provoking black to play bishop g4, which is a long-term positional mistake. You're also eager to see black castle short or play pawn to h6, which are the most common moves in this line, and that's what you're looking for. So we'll call this our juicy waiting position. After bishop b3, a prophylactic move, Kasparov's opponent played bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen, but this was unnecessary. Remember, this is the right time to play pawn to h3. If bishop takes, would take back with the queen. If bishop h5, the top played move, which is what Kasparov's opponent played, again we don't rush out with pawn to g4. We know it's part of our middle game plan, but g4 will only reveal our plans of not wanting to castle short. So at least we can just wait for black to castle short. So here it doesn't matter, we can play queen e2 or simply what Kasparov played here, knight bd2. Remember, move order is not really the determinant of our success as long as we know where our moves go. Black castled short, which is the top played move. And now you remember, we replace castle short with what? Queen e2. So queen e2 is the first key move that protects our e4 pawn in case of d5 and d takes e4 by black. Anyways, Kasparov's opponent played pawn to s6, kind of a prophylactic move as well. And remember I said you don't play pawn to a4, even though that is also playable. Our bonus tip says only a5 equals pawn to a4. So if you see a6, just do nothing about that. Continue with your plan. That's what Kasparov did. Then black played another prophylactic move, pawn to h6. And you know our plan, you guys. Since black has already castled short, we can either become aggressive by playing pawn to g4 right away and later on play knight g3, or change the move order of this. Here Kasparov, being an aggressive player, immediately played pawn to g4, attacking the light squared bishop, and after bishop g6, Kasparov even missed a better move in this position, which is not much of a stretch again. Stockfish loves pawn to g5, which will immediately open up the king side. And that's another benefit of not castling short early, because now white has the open g-file for the king's rook. So you see how beautiful that looks, and the h-pawn will continue marching up to heaven. So the plan is still the same, but move order sequence can change. Anyways, Kasparov did not play pawn to g5, he just played knight g3, following our main plan. And then his opponent realized that there is more traffic on the king side. That's why he played knight e7, trying to solve his king side. But anyways, Kasparov played knight h4, and now you see the main idea, you guys. The idea is to play knight h5 to place the knight on this juicy a5 square. That's what you want to do in the Italian opening. Now black played knight h7. After all, there is nothing much that black can do here if you just look at the position. Now wait a second. Knight takes g6 is okay, but not the wisest decision, because that would just end white's attack right away. So Kasparov played knight h5, which is even better. After bishop takes a5, the plan is not to take back with the g knight, but to open up the g file for the king's rook And this is exactly what Kasparov did, you guys. So you see, he's playing all this while the king is still on the center. That's why you delay castling shot. And this sits well with all our 7 commandments and the moves that you're not supposed to play. Anyways, at this stage of the game, this is out of our opening prep. Black can play anything and millions of moves that I cannot manage to cover in this course. For example, Black played knight back to f6 and Kasparov played rook g1. You can already see the plan is very simple. King h8. Black just unpinned his f7 pawn. You can see our prophylactic Italian bishop doing a great job of covering the highlighted diagonal. And then knight h5, knight takes, queen takes. Kasparov is just one move away from sacrificing his bishop and checkmate his opponent. So Black played knight back to g8, but that left the f7 pawn undefended. Kasparov took, and now you can see the highlighted pressure, you guys. Queen f6 was played. Just to show you what would have happened if Black played knight to f6, Kasparov would have played queen g6. Because if the queen goes away, the light squared bishop was going to be taken for free. So queen g6 was the solution. And on the next move, Kasparov was going to retreat his light squared bishop. Taking on h6 is another move to consider. And maybe even mate, knight. Later on, queen g7 checkmate. Anyways, queen f6 was played. Now wait a second. Kasparov here played bishop back to b3, and this is what I talked about, you guys. It's not like after watching this course or after studying some opening theory, you're going to be doing everything right. The thing is, you're going to make some inaccuracies and some mistakes, but as long as you know your fixed plan and where the pieces go, you have higher chances of winning the game. Kasparov should have taken the knight on g8 right away and play rook g6 to further simplify the game, but from here Kasparov played bishop b3, which according to Stockfish was only a good move but not the best. Pawn to c6 was played. Then Kasparov once again missed bishop g5. He played rook g6 this time, which is also a good move, but according to Stockfish, bishop g5 was the best move because it immediately kills Black's queen. There's nothing that Black can do to save his queen. For example, all these squares are covered, including these. If Black plays g6 counterattacking Kasparov's queen, Kasparov was going to play bishop takes f6 with check first and get out of trouble. So once again, it's not like after watching this video or after watching this course, you'll be playing correct moves all the way. The idea is to know where the pieces go, you guys. So Kasparov played rook g6 instead of bishop g5. And anyways, he took the knight and still ended up to play bishop g5. And right here, Black resigned. Because on the next move, Kasparov wanted to sack his bishop, and whatever Black does, he was still going to win the game like this and this. So this is not part of our opening prep. Our opening prep ended somewhere on move 20, I guess. I was just showing you how the game can proceed. For example, you can see our Italian pawn structure is still intact. The pawn on e4, the pawn on d3, the pawn on c3, and we didn't even touch the a pawn and the b pawn. The attack was all on the king side. This is how you play chess, you guys. And remember, I told you in the introduction of this video that pawns speak a language that beginners don't easily understand. White pawns were pointing towards the king side, and that's where Kasparov played the rest of his game. Anyways, so back to our prophylactic bishop move, where we looked at bishop g4 in the Kasparov's game. So I want to show you another way you can punish bishop g4 pin in this particular position using another popular game to learn from. So once again, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian, bishop c5, the Giuoco piano, c3, stopping knight d4, knight f6, attacking the pawn, then d3. Welcome back to the Giuoco Pianissimo once again. Ladies and gentlemen, remember the top played move is d6, not d5. So d6, and then what do you do? I want to see if you're still following me. What do you do after pawn to d6? Should you play pawn to h3? Should you develop your knight on d2 or bishop? Or maybe queen e2, or maybe castle shot? None of these moves. Before playing anything else, you always remember to play a waiting move, bishop b3, waiting for your opponent to blunder with bishop g4 or castle shot. Not really a blunder, but just a long-term positional error. So again, we are still looking at bishop g4, where you immediately respond with h3. So bishop g4 equals pawn to h3. Always remember that. You already know the ideas as highlighted. They'll play bishop h5 mostly. And again, you don't want to reveal your plan of not wanting to castle short early by rushing to play pawn to g4. At least wait for black to castle short. That's when you can go with your plan of playing g4. So you just go knight bd2 or queen e2. It doesn't matter. You replace queen e2 with castle short. So you go knight bd2. They mostly castle short. That's the top played move. And now remember, it was on move 9 right here where Kasparov played queen e2 before playing knight f1. But in this game that we are analyzing, we see white switching over the plan by playing the immediate knight f1. I mean, the whole idea is just to know where the pieces go exactly and when they are supposed to be played. Anyways, d5 was played. Remember, one of our prohibited moves is do not take on d5 somewhere at this stage. Again, this is another advantage of playing bishop b3 on move 6. See that pawn to d5 hasn't come with a fork this time. So d5 can easily be met with queen e2, our key Italian move. Again, they'll mostly take on e4, after which you take back. What did I say? By doing so, you have maintained your two Italian center pawns, the c3 and the e4 pawn. They'll play something like queen e7. Maybe they want to develop their a rook. You continue with your plan and see how we are not even paying attention to black's dark squared bishop on c5. So don't even think of bishop e3, just like I said in the intro. Even here you can play pawn to g4. You are safe, but knight g3 is safer. Attacking the bishop, they play bishop g6. When you leave stockfish to run here, it would choose bishop g5. But as humans, we don't always play like stockfish. So knight h4 seems to be more natural and easy to follow up. That's what white did in this game. Black played rook a d8, white played bishop g5. Here we are also provoking black to play pawn to h6. For example, if they play pawn to h6, that will be a big blunder, you guys. We have knight takes g6. That's another idea of knight h4, you guys, together with this prophylactic bishop that you played in the opening stage. So the f7 pawn is pinned to the king by our prophylactic Italian bishop, and this would just be winning for you. If they don't play h6 here, and let's say they play something like rook f e8, whatever, yes, even though knight takes g6 is very much possible, just play safe and add more attackers to the king side by playing queen f3. We are still provoking black to play pawn to h6 so that we can take the free bishop on g6. They may play something else, and again, we don't take the bishop. We just go knight hf5. That's our juicy f5 square for our knight. Bishop takes, knight takes, attacking the queen, queen f8. And this can even be worse, you guys. There are many tactics here that you can employ. The direct one is to take on f6. That's okay. But if you zoom in your eyeballs, you can see these tactics that come naturally after solving a lot of puzzles. Knight h6 check. It's not good for black to take because our bishop may take on f6 and now checkmate is unavoidable. As highlighted, if black plays king h8, we can begin taking all of black's pieces as follows. Give another check. There's nothing that black can do here. You're just taking while giving a lot of checks. King h8, knight f7 check again. I mean, this is very funny to watch, you guys. You go queen takes f6. Now, this is just one of the many ways the game can go. We can't cover everything. We are just interested to look at the important opening moves. Now, let me show you another way to deal with black's bishop g4 response. Let's move on. So again, you start with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. So now black is over controlling the d4 square. You go pawn to c3. They play knight to f6, the top played move. And now you go pawn to d3, defending your e4 pawn. Again, the top played move d6. And what do you do next? It's very easy, you guys, to rush out with castle short, pawn to h3, knight d2, or even bishop g5. That's why I want you to forget about all this. I want you to get used to this move, bishop b3. So remember not to do anything on move 6. You simply make sure that your bishop is on b3. Bishop b3 avoids pawn to d5, that's one. And again, it avoids knight a5, because if knight a5 comes, you are ready to put your bishop on c2. And that's just a prophylactic move to wait for black to play the top played move, bishop g4. Again, remember from our 7 commandments, we only want to play pawn to h3 after we see bishop g4 by black, so that's okay. Bishop h5, again, you don't want to show your cards fast by playing pawn to g4, so just keep on developing your big pieces. Black will castle short, you can go queen e2 or even knight f1 just like white did in this game. And once again, after d5, remember, you don't want to be the one to take on d5, you just maintain your Italian center pawns by playing queen e2, because if they take, you are going to maintain your 2 center pawns. Bishop g6 is the top played move. Now you go knight g3, just playing safe instead of pawn to g4. Knight h5 is the top played move. Whenever you see knight to h5, by the way, they want to put their knight on f4 or play pawn to f5 in the absence of your light squared bishop. So you just simplify the game. And now it is even okay to go g4 here, going for the kingside expansion immediately because your king is still very safe on the center. You can play bishop d2. By the way, we looked at a similar line like this earlier on where black plays pawn to h5 and then you go knight g5. But here, if they play pawn to h6, you can still go h5 and just continue destroying the king side. There's nothing to remember here. Just know where the pieces go. I'll keep on saying these words so that they stick into your mind. That's just how I teach. H takes g5, knight takes g5, queen f6. You go rook h3. The idea is to put your rook on f3. Remember, this is what I meant by creativity, being creative. You need to be a good artist in order to draw a good and clear picture on the board. Knight e7, rook f3, this is just another way of punishing black's early bishop g4. Sometimes black may choose to delay castling short. Let me just show you what I mean. Especially if they know that you don't like castling short very early. After you play pawn to h3, chasing their dark squared bishop, and now you go knight bd2. Instead of castling short, black may choose to play something like queen d7, which is the second most played move. Whenever I see this, it automatically clicks in my mind that this dude wants to castle long. That's another benefit of not castling short early, because we can always castle long if we want. Anyways, you continue with knight f1, see what they want to do. They castle long. Wow. You still go knight g3, attacking their light squared bishop. You know you're not going to castle short. Bishop g6. Then you go queen e2. Just some simple stuffs. Again, the top played move is d5. Then think about what to do here. This is where you can develop your bishop on the most active square. If d takes e4, you take back. Black's knight on f6 is pinned to the rook. They may play queen d3. Bishop takes f6. You mess up their pawn structure. These are just basic chess principles. Knight h4. Let them take you, because you can take back with your king. By the way, you can't take back with your knight because your e4 pawn is going to be hanging. You always need to exercise patience. You can take back with your king. That's okay. You both don't have queens, but you are ahead in development, and so don't be afraid of exposing your king that way. Enough of the bishop g4 lines. Now let's move on to the next chapter where we'll be looking at the rest of the moves like bishop e6, castle short, bishop b6, a5, a6, and h6. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go! Welcome to chapter 8 of my Italian course. In this chapter, we are going to be looking at black's bishop e6 line. Remember in the previous chapter, we were looking at the bishop g4 line where we respond with h3 and so on and so forth. So it is variation. We start with e4 once again, then e5 by black. We're doing a lot of repetitions, so hope these things will stick into your mind. Knight to f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian, again bishop c5, the Giuoco piano. Once again, black is over controlling the d4 square, which is why you need to play c3, our key Italian pawn move, to stop knight d4 or knight b4. And as usual, knight to f6 is the top played move. Attacking our undefended e4 pawn, we go pawn to d3, and then black plays another top played move d6. By the way, if they castle short, it's time for you to smile, because at least black has castled short before you have castled short. You only want to castle short after black castles short, plus you have all these ideas of expanding on the king side, so you just need to know where the pieces go once again. Anyways, pawn to d6, the top played move is what everybody plays. Now you go bishop b3. If you don't play bishop b3 very early, you guys, you are likely to meet knight a5, which will make them take your light squared bishop. You don't want to trade off your light squared bishop with black's knight. So another bonus tip that you can add to your notes: don't allow knight takes bishop trade. So that's it. So after pawn to d6, just go bishop b3, a prophylactic move. If bishop g4, you already know what to do, but the move that we are looking at in this chapter is bishop e6, an early bishop e6. Again, remember from our prohibited moves, whenever you see bishop e6, don't think of taking back, please. That will just strengthen black's position. On the center, his f file will be opened for his king's rook. So no bishop takes e6. So you can just leave your light squared bishop as is and play something else like knight bd2 or queen e2. No memorizing of moves again. Knight bd2 seems to be more awesome for me. By the way, it is good for black to take your bishop because you are going to take back with your a pawn, and that will open up the f file for your queen's rook. You're going to have a semi-open file, or a semi-open file. And for whatever reasons, black can do all sorts of rubbish here. For example, pawn to d5. Remember from our prohibited moves, if pawn to d5 comes when your bishop is on b3, you don't have to take, you can just play queen e2, waiting for black to take you, and then you take back so that you can still maintain your two Italian center pawns. You can see the c3 and the e4 pawn. So once again, pray that black takes your light squared bishop to help you open up the a file. This is good, by the way. This is very good for you as white. If they castle short, of course knight f1 is our main plan, but whenever you have chance to play other best moves, you can do that. For example, the best move in this position, I can already tell, is pawn to b4, because that attacks a piece. So in chess, there are good moves and best moves. You want to play best moves first before playing good moves. If bishop d6, you're going to play something like pawn to b5 and win the free pawn on e5. If bishop d6, you now continue with your main plan of putting your knight on g3. And this is the best example. If they try to stop your knight f5 maneuver with pawn to g6, well, you can just play something else. Maybe pawn to h3. By the way, you can even castle short here. Since black has already castled short, that's what matters the most. Almost anything is playable here, but here I can play pawn to h4, just trying to be a good artist. If h5, I go bishop g5, now pinning the knight to the queen. Now I'm being a good artist. This has nothing to do with our opening prep, it's just me being an artist, drawing a great picture that I want to see on the board. Let's say king g7. Now I can castle short and I don't even have to develop my rook on c1 because it's already controlling this beautiful open file. I mean the semi-open file along the a file. And I'm also thinking of rook e1. So this is just me, you guys. After pawn to d6 and bishop b3, a prophylactic move. Again, if black plays bishop e6, just remember not to take the light squared bishop. Play knight bd2 once again. If d5, well, your bishop is safe, so you can just play queen e2. D takes e4, d takes e4. We just looked at the line where black has to take your light squared bishop so that you open up your a file and then you play the best move. There are times when black won't take your light squared bishop right away, and you can see the top played move here is castle short. Now this is where you can be very creative, very flexible, respond to the current situation that you are seeing on the board. Remember what I advised in the introduction of this video. So why am I saying this? Yes, one of our prohibited moves is not to take on e6. That should be rule number 5, no bishop takes e6. But again, one of our Italian key takeaways from the introduction is that we need to be very flexible and respond to the current situations. In this case, the light squared bishop is not defended by any piece, so I can just go ahead and take that, double up black's pawns on the center, and on the next move, instead of playing the good move, knight f1, I can go for the best move, knight c4, to put more pressure on the lonely e5 pawn. So this is just how we become flexible in chess. So again, it's not about memorizing moves, it's all about responding to what you are seeing on the board while being consistent with your plan. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Welcome to chapter 9 of my Italian course. In this chapter, we'll be looking at the castle short line. We have already covered the bishop g4 line and the bishop e6 line, also pawn to d5. Now it's time to talk about what to do if black just castles short early. Again, you start with e4, they respond with e5, knight to f3, knight c6. By this time, you should be familiar with these moves. You play pawn to c3, your key Italian pawn move. After knight to f6, attacking your pawn, now you defend it, then pawn to d6. And after playing bishop b3, your prophylactic move, waiting for black to make a positional mistake, then you just see them castling short all of a sudden. Now look at the position once again. First of all, it's not a blunder to castle short, but remember, we want to be consistent with our plan. So instead of playing pawn to h3, for example, which is also fine, we can just play knight bd2, or even better, queen e2, which I recommend especially for beginners, so that you don't forget to develop your queen on e2 later on. Again, if they play bishop g4, that will just transpose back to what we have looked at. You start with h3, you can go pawn to g4 later on, or maybe just play decently with knight bd2, then knight f1, knight g3, all those ideas you already know. So instead of bishop g4, let's say black plays pawn to h6, maybe stopping your possible bishop g5, which you were not even thinking of, or knight g5, knight bd2 is what you play. Rook e8, again you go knight f1, nothing to memorize. Pawn to a5. Now wait a second, remember from our 7 commandments, we meet a5 with pawn to a4, period. If they play a6, we do nothing about that, we just continue developing on the king side, but a5 must be met with a4. And again, whenever you see d5, there's no need to take, since your line squared bishop is not on c4, so you continue developing your moves. Let them take, you take back, because you still maintain your 2 Italian center pawns. Still following our rules, you guys. Nothing complicated. If bishop e6, again you remember not to take. By the way, this is different from the last example that I showed you in the previous chapter, because this time if you take black's light squared bishop, they'll just take back with their rook. They won't double up their pawns. So that's why taking is not a wise decision here. And this is a perfect example where you can play bishop c2 since your light squared bishop was undefended. And now 3 of your pieces are protecting the e4 pawn, which is very good. If queen e7, just a random move, what can you do? I mean, almost anything is playable. Remember, you don't want to play bishop e3. It's out of the equation. You've already maintained your Italian pawn structure. So the only sensible moves that you can play here are castle short or even pawn to h3. I mean, it doesn't matter. I like h3 because it stops knight g4. It's clear that black will not play bishop g4 at this stage of the game. So h3 is okay. Let's see what black wants to do. We castle short and hey, we are just playing normal chess here. For example, now that we have developed every piece and there's a lot of tension on the center, black wants to play rook e8. Well, this is when you can play bishop e3. See, it has only come in the middle game. This trade is okay because now black cannot play knight g4 attacking your queen. So this is very much okay. If rook e8, remember where to develop your rooks. The king's rook should sit on e1. The queen's rook should sit on c1. For example, rook fe1, b6 by black. You go rook sc1. By the way, don't play knight h4 if you don't have to. There are some tactics here. So you can just play your cards very well. I can just trade off the rooks if I want. For example, I am not comfortable seeing black controlling this open file. So even trading rooks is very much okay. If they don't take, you are going to take. If they take, you take. Pop, pop, Queen d7, you can even go ahead and trade queens, or maybe just save your light squared bishop like this. They can't come into your territory. I mean, everything is well defended. So I believe this is the idea. And this was all in the castle short line if they don't play bishop g4 or bishop e6 right away. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Welcome to chapter 10 of our Italian opening prep. In this chapter, we are going to look at what to do if black tries to copy you. I mean, with bishop b6, let's say they are also trying to play prophylactically, if at all there is that word. Anyways, you start with e4, they go e5, knight to f3, knight c6, again the Italian opening, bishop c5, the Giuoco piano, over controlling the d4 square, so you play c3 to prevent knight d4 or knight b4. Knight to f6, attacking your pawn on e4, you defend it, and let's say d6, the top played move once again. Now you go bishop b3, a prophylactic move that you always need to get used to. So we have already looked at what to do after bishop g4 in this exact position, and if black plays castle short, so after playing your prophylactic move, black wants to copy you and then they play bishop b6. In this case, you just continue with your main plans. Remember, you don't want to castle short early before black castles short. You also don't want to play an early pawn to h3. You'd love them to play bishop g4. That's when you play pawn to h3 so that you gain initiative. So you simply replace castling short with what? Queen e2. That's what we said in our 7 commandments, remember? So again, black plays pawn to h6. Another prophylactic move. Well, you just continue with knight bd2. And this is the time when they mostly castle short. You can see in the latest database, and you already know the idea. So we are playing very slow chess. And now this time they play bishop e6. Again, remember, you don't want to be the one to take that bishop, because you're going to open up the f file for your opponent, and they're going to have very solid pawns on the center. You don't want this to happen. So at best, just leave your light squared bishop like that. Rule number 5, no bishop takes e6. So you just go knight g3, continue with your plans. If they take you, wow, that's very good, because now they have helped you to open up this highlighted semi-open file. Let's say they play knight e7. I mean, whenever you notice that black wants to copy your idea of putting his knight on f4, it's time to rush with knight h4. If knight g6, you don't want to take on g6. Remember this, you guys, because your attack will end. You will have no chance to put your other knight on f5, because there will be a pawn on g6 controlling the f5 square. So instead of taking the knight on g6, just put your knight on f5, knight hf5. By the way, they can't play this because you're going to take with your dark squared bishop. Again, you can see we haven't developed our dark squared bishop even up to now. So our plan is very consistent, just like what I said in the introduction of our course. So again, if pawn to d5, remember, you don't want to take. Our plan is very consistent. Let them take us. Just play something like castle short if you want, because black has already castled short, and you can also play something like pawn to h3. For example, h3 is okay. If d takes e4 again, you can take back, maintaining your 2 Italian center pawns. If knight f4, wait a second, this situation is very different. Remember from my key takeaways, you need to exercise patience and only respond to the current situation. Respond to what you are seeing on the board. Take a minute. If you carelessly take black's knight on f4 this time, they will take your bishop with tempo. They are attacking your knight on g3, and your pawn on e4 is exposed. Next, they may play rook e8. This is not just good. Although you are not losing completely, but this just makes your position look bad, and so you don't rush out with moves. In some lines, knight f4 can be met with bishop takes f4. That's good, but not when your knight is on g3 and you haven't yet castled short. So if I were you, I can play something like queen f3. Let them give a check. That's okay. My king will be very safe on e2. There is no other attack. This time if they try to go knight f4, well, I can just go ahead and take that knight. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that this time my queen is now sitting on f3, so if pawn takes, it won't attack my knight. I'll take that free pawn. So this is okay. Hope they are not going to play knight back to f4 check. If they take your dark squared bishop, well, that's good. You had no plans for that dark squared bishop. Just take with one of your rooks, and on the next move you're going to play rook d1. So lucky you if you are watching this chapter, because in the process you're getting these free tips that will help you have a good understanding of chess. Anyways, so this was all in the bishop b6 line where black tries to copy you. Of course, the games won't be going the same way. The most important stuff is for you to understand these principles, know where to put your pieces and when to play those moves. Anyways, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Welcome to chapter 11 of my Italian opening prep. In this chapter, we'll be looking at what to do after black plays pawn to a5. Spoiler alert, we already discussed this in the intro of this video. One of our rules states that you should always meet a5 with a4. Let's see how to do that in a practical game. So you start with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4 the Italian, bishop c5 the Giuoco Piano. Then you go pawn to c3, stopping knight d4, knight f6, and pawn to d3 the Giuoco Pianissimo. A very quiet game. Once again, pawn to d6 is the top played move. I mean, sometimes the move order can change. After you play bishop c4 the Italian opening, black may play the two knights defense. Well, this time they are attacking your e4 pawn. So if you play pawn to c3, they are going to take that undefended pawn. So in this case, you need to defend your pawn. And if they play bishop c5, now that's when you want to play pawn to c3, because right now black is over controlling your d4 square. So you can play pawn to c3, and look, we are back into our main position of interest where black plays pawn to d6 on move 5. So pawn to d6 is the top played move. Once again, what do? You don't play any other move before putting your bishop to safety. So you play a prophylactic move, bishop b3. Again, if bishop g4, you already know what to do. You always want your opponent to play bishop g4, by the way, a tactical mistake or castle shot early. But this time, your opponents may play pawn to a5 right away. It's also a move. Remember, you meet a5 with a4. That's our bonus tip in our 7 commandments. If they play d5, you don't want to take on d5. Remember, you play queen e2. You just continue with your normal plans. Again, you are maintaining your two Italian center pawns, the c3 pawn and the e4 pawn. If castle shot by black or whatever they can do, you don't even rush to play pawn to h3. Don't even think of bishop e3, remember, or bishop g5. These moves must be out of the equation. The move is knight bd2. Once again, you're just playing the same things over and over. And it's funny how even at this stage of the game, you will see them playing bishop g4, which is a very late pin, but this allows you to start pawn storming on the king side right away. The normal way to go about this is to play knight f1 and knight g3, but let me just cover a little bit about g4. You can also go pawn to g4 here. You haven't castled short, remember? After bishop g6, like in the Kaspa Rov's game, you'll focus on playing on the king side, but wait a second. Looking at the current situation on the board right now, do you think knight f1 is good? That's your main plan, yes, but it's all about over controlling your e4 pawn, you guys. Always pay attention to your e4 pawn. Be a good driver, be a good artist. If you play knight f1 trying to go knight g3, well, you just left your e4 pawn hanging, so that won't be good. That's why you need to play bishop c2 here, over controlling your e4 pawn, so that after queen e7, now you can go knight f1. You want to go knight g3, your e4 pawn is well protected. Rook fd8, let's say. You go knight g3, you want to castle short and hide your king. Let's say rook d7, they want to make a little battery there. And now you have all sorts of moves to play. You can play bishop e3 here. That's okay since black doesn't have knight g4. You can also castle short. Anything you play here makes a lot of sense. But give me a chance to play knight h4 and I'll do it. By the way, if you think knight takes e4 is a smart move, you know, counter-attacking my knight on h4, I have an in-between move, knight takes g6, attacking the queen. Even if they take, my capture comes with a check, so I'm going to win black's queen and also black's knight. I was able to spot all this because I have patience and I'm responding to current situations on the board. Instead of knight takes e4, if they play something like rook at d8, now this is when I can plant my knight on f5, the juicy f5 square forever. If queen e6, I mean, from here you can figure out what to do using your puzzle solving skill. I mean, let's say g5, knight e8, castle short. So this is just how the Italian game goes, you guys. Quite a maneuvering opening, but you need to get used to it. So in this chapter, we were just looking at the pawn to a5 and pawn to a4 moves. All these other things just chipped in because of these. So you just remember to respond like this. Anyways, alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Welcome to chapter 12 of my Italian course. In this chapter, we'll be looking at the a6 response by black. I mean, we just finished looking at the pawn to a5 response. Now it is pawn to a6. Let's see what to do against that. You start with e4, they play e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian, and now they play bishop c5, the Giuoco piano, over controlling the d4 square. You need to stop them with c3, knight to f6, attacking your pawn. You go pawn to d3, creating your Italian center pawns, and again pawn to d6, the top played move. And now what? Again, you remember to put your light squared bishop to safety, otherwise black will get rid of your light squared bishop if you don't play bishop b3, a prophylactic move. Anyways, it is in this position where most of your opponents will play castle short or bishop g4, after which you respond with pawn to h3. We looked at all this stuff. Now in this chapter, we are looking at the pawn to a6 line. So remember, in our 7 commandments, only a5 equals a4. That was the bonus tip, if I remember very well. If a6, do nothing from the queen side. Boy, here you can just rush out with knight bd2 instead of a4. There is no attack that is coming on your light squared bishop, so just continue doing your thing. Again, you can see castle short is what everybody plays, and now we have seen that black is not really interested in playing bishop g4. We can just castle after him. See that we have only castled short after black has castled short, so that's fine. So you can be flexible. Remember, knight f1 was also optional, followed by knight g3 or even pawn to h3. But just to show you that sometimes move order doesn't matter and you don't have to memorize anything as long as you know the plan. Even this can work. So after you castle short, let's say black plays h6 for whatever reasons. Now remember, your knight is misplaced on d2, so you still want to put it on g3. That's why you play rook e1. Now this time it's not your queen which is defending your e4 pawn, it is your rook. So this is just to show you that even this is playable as long as you know what you're doing. Again, if your opponent ever goes knight a5, trying to capture your light squared bishop, you do not want to give it away. Our Italian bishop is really strong, so if it's attacked by black's knight, you just put it on c2 and it will completely be safe, while your opponent's knight will be misplaced on a5. For example, you are threatening to play pawn to b4 on the next move. So they are going to play something like bishop a7. Then you continue with your main plans, knight f1, c5, you go knight g3, I mean knight c6. If they play that, well, it's clear that they have no interest in playing bishop g4. If you want, you can play pawn to h3 or even better knight h4. I don't know. You go pawn to h3. If they go b5, you go knight h4. You know, trying to put your knight on a5 for good. If bishop e6, you play knight h5. So this is very good for you. Remember, this was all in a6. let's just go back a little bit and see what else black can do in this position instead of playing knight a5. So you just played rook e1 after castling short, and now black plays bishop e6 in this position. Well, if your opponent ever goes bishop e6 trying to capture your light squared bishop once again, just let him take it to help you open up the F file for your queen's rook. We've already talked about this a million times. So you continue with your plans. If they take you, that's well and good. And now one of your knights can freely sit on f5 since black doesn't have a light squared bishop. Unless black just wants to weaken his king side with, lots of pawn moves. Let's say d5. If they take and pawn takes, they're going to trade off their queen. So you don't want that. You go queen c2 or queen e2, whatever. If d takes e4, you take back with your pawn, maintaining your two Italian center pawns. In case of knight g4, respond to the current situation, remember. So the move is rook e2 to defend the f2 pawn. Next, you are going to play pawn to f3, chasing black's knight away from g4. In case black plays knight h5, maybe they want to play knight f4 or pawn to f5. You can just go knight g3 if you want, but honestly, to stop pawn to f5, I like playing pawn to g4. This looks good. Can you see that? Like, my g and my e pawn are both controlling the f5 square, so no pawn to f5 for black. This is how you stop pawn to f5, by the way. If queen f6, just giving an example, counter-attacking your knight, the best you can do here is just to take, but even better is king g2, responding to the current situation. Remember, now the knight is under attack for real. If knight f4, you get rid of that knight. This trade is good. You play pawn to h3. They still don't have pawn to f5. That's the beauty of g4. If h5, you have an option to go knight h2 or play tactically with knight g3, opening up your h file on purpose, like you have rook h1 next, and black is in real trouble. If you don't want to give up your free pawn, well, you can just take on h5. I mean, we are just responding to current situations. Most of these middle game stuffs are not going to happen in your games. I just want you to be tactically sharp and get used to these possibilities. After g takes h5, next you are going to play knight g3 and your pawn will be safe. Anyways, but again, instead of knight a5 or bishop e6, there are times when black may still play bishop g4. A lot of your opponents will still play bishop g4 because they have already developed all the other pieces. And now it's time to develop the light squared bishop on the most active square, but we already know what to do. Whenever you see bishop g4, you go pawn to h3, and it's amazing how you can even play pawn to g4 right away in this position. It's up to you to choose to be aggressive like Kasparov or play safe with knight f1. If they go pawn to b5, you go knight g3. I mean, these are just possibilities again, you guys. If they go bishop g6 like what they do, you don't go knight f5 right away because you don't want this trade to happen. Your e file is going to be open. So you first of all go knight h4, and this is a great example of how to attack in the Italian opening. You guys, your Italian bishop is pinning black's f7 pawn to the king. You are about to take the free bishop on g6. If they take on e4, for example, thinking they are counter-attacking your knight, well, you can just take on g6 and black is in trouble. The rook is under attack. The f7 pawn is pinned by our Italian bishop. If bishop takes f2, use your mind, solve what you can see. Currently, you can't play king h2 because that will come with check after bishop takes g3. You can't play king h1 because knight takes g3 will come with check. So the move to play here is king f1. You are solving what you are seeing on the board right now. No memorization here. Your knight is very safe on g3. If knight takes g3, now you can take the bishop. If queen f6 check, you take the knight. If they take your knight, you hide your king. You're just up a piece for nothing. So this is quite good for you. So if they behave themselves and they don't take on e4 because of what we just finished looking at, and let's say they just play bishop h7, saving their light squared bishop, well, it's up to you to go knight f5. You are not restricted to what you can do, but even better is to recruit more pieces to the attacking side or to where the attack is. So queen f3 makes a lot of sense. And after something like knight e7, maybe they want to recruit more defenders to the king side. This fails due to tactics which you develop through solving a lot of puzzles. For example, bishop takes h6, because if black takes, you are going to take the free knight. those are just simple tactics you need to develop over time. And so this was all in the A6 line. Remember, they might not play exactly like that, but what matters the most is to have a consistent middle game plan. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Welcome to chapter 13 of our Italian opening study, last chapter in our course, Black's sideline responses, including pawn to h6. So again, you start with e4, they play e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4 Italian, bishop c5 the Giuoco piano, again pawn to c3. Once again, instead of knight to f6, attacking your pawn where you play pawn to d3, I told you guys that your opponent may change the move order and play pawn to d6. You don't have to rush to play pawn to h3 or castle short or whatever. Even though your e4 pawn is not under attack, you can just go ahead and play pawn to d3. You finish your Italian center pawns first. Again, you know what to do. If bishop g4, you go pawn to h3. If knight to f6, now we are back to our Italian opening position where you need to play the prophylactic move. What move is that? Bishop b3, waiting to see what black is up to. Again, if bishop g4, you have pawn to h3. And in this last chapter, we are looking at the pawn to h6 line. We looked at almost everything. Pawn to a6, pawn to a5, castle short, bishop g4, pawn to d5, bishop e6, bishop b6. And now it's time to look at pawn to h6. These are sidelines that you need to master as well. So once again, you don't rush to castle short. Black hasn't castled short already. You don't go pawn to h3. We replace castle short with queen e2. Now all along I've been talking about castling short and bishop g4. Up to now, I haven't covered what to do if black tries to play something like knight g4. You know what most white players do is castle short. But here is the secret, you guys. Do you know that this early knight g4 by black, which teams up with the dark squared bishop, is almost very useless in this position? Let me show you how useless this move is. You can just go pawn to h3. That's a brilliant move. The thing is, if knight takes f2, which is the top played move, that's a free piece because you simply play rook f1 and black's knight on f2 is trapped. There's absolutely nothing they can do to rescue their knight. They can try to take some pawns, I don't know, but you can just play rook h1 here. There's even another tactic that is fun to play. Bishop sack on f7, bishop takes f7 if king takes, and now you go knight g5. This is double check. On the next move, you're going to win black's light squared bishop like that. If queen h4 check, you just cover the check and you're good. Yeah, like bishop e3 is coming in case of rook f8. So don't be afraid of knight g4 in this position. You can always play rook f1 instead of castling short. Castling short is okay, but you don't have to. So just go pawn to h3. That knight should go back to f6. In case they decide to take with their bishop, once again the knight is in trouble, or it will be in trouble after you play king d1, because now the bishop is under attack plus the knight. So that's just a little trap to know. After black plays knight g4, they don't have to play knight g4. And you don't have to castle short if they play knight g4. So after we play queen e2, we may see another sideline move by black here. For example, pawn to a6. Remember, we only want to play a4 if black plays a5. So in this case, we just do nothing about a6. We continue with our plan. Once again, if knight g4, just go h3. This is a very fun way to trap the knight. We already looked at that. They can't take with their bishop as well. So don't be afraid of knight g4 and don't even rush to castle short once again. In case they castle short, you just continue with your plans. Knight f1. You can delay h3 as long as you can after black castles short. So let's say b5, you now go knight g3. Next you want to play h3 and castle short or vice versa. What if black plays a5 in this position? Well, you know they want to play a4. So you remember one of our rules says meet a5 with a4. This is where you want to play a4. If black takes, you take back with your bishop. That'll be okay. If b4, you just do nothing about that. you castle short. See, we haven't touched pawn to h3 up to now because it becomes an optional move after black castles short. Tip number 3, we delay h3 until black moves his light squared bishop once, or if they castle short, that's okay. If black takes on c3, you take back with your b pawn, and once again you are controlling the d4 square and the b4 square. Black can't do anything. If bishop e6, see, your bishop is hanging and you don't want to be the one to take on e6. Remember rule number 5 from the prohibited moves: no bishop takes e6. So just play bishop c2, your bishop is safe. Rook e8, you go pawn to h3 because you have played all your moves and it was clear that black was not interested to play bishop g4, so this is okay. Oh boy. If rook b8, there are a lot of things to do. You can play bishop e3. This is in the middle game, so bishop e3 is not much of a stretch. And even better is knight h4. Next you want to play knight h5, so this would be good. If pawn to d5, once again you do nothing about that. If d takes e4, you maintain your 2 Italian center pawns. Your c3 pawn is still well protected on its own. Black cannot reach it, so that's good. If black decides to play d4, for example, you respond to the current situation. Be patient. See, the thing is, if you play pawn to c4 here, you have created all these weak squares for yourself, and this pawn may be a liability in the long run. So you can just go for simplification here. Your c3 pawn is just an isolated pawn, so get rid of your weakness, and from here you may just simplify the game. And let's say you trade rooks, you can continue playing as highlighted. I'd prefer to be white in this position. Alright guys, now it's your turn to digest, process the information that I just delivered in this chapter, and most importantly, to practice through the moves and see how well you understood the concepts. This is how we learn chess. So come on, pause the video and open the master PGN of this study, which you can find in the video description down below, and head to the current chapter to go through the lines once again. Let's go. Alright, so technically speaking, this is the end of our course, but I did promise you guys in the introduction of this course that I'm also going to show you what else you can do just in case black doesn't respond with pawn to e5 on move 1, because you know chess is so dynamic. But of course, I'll just do you a favor because this next section is not part of my Italian opening repertoire, so just take this as a bonus. Anyways, the short version of the video that you are about to watch was also posted on my YouTube channel. So what you're about to watch is the complete version of that short thing that you saw on YouTube. Let's go. So after pawn to e4, in this introductory video, I'll show you how to continue if black plays pawn to e5, and also how to play against the Sicilian defense, the Carocca defense, and the French defense. I call these the big 4. In fact, if you check the master's database, pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense is by far the top played move after e4. Then pawn to e5 is the second most played move, and that's according to the master's database. In the Lichess database, it's the other way around, and pawn to e6 is the third most played move, then followed by pawn to c6, which is the Caroccan defense. So these are the most common responses that you will see from your opponents, and so you need to have a very solid and complete repertoire against each of these responses by black. And that's what this introductory video is all about. So I'll try to be very brief and go through the moves very fast. Don't worry, you can always slow down the video if I go very fast. I mean, YouTube has that feature. So here we begin with pawn to e4, and then black responds with pawn to e5. This is called the king's pawn opening. What is my recommendation against the king's pawn opening? Well, here just continue with knight to f3, and after knight c6, hey, there's no one to impress. Go for the Italian game. So just play bishop c4, and this is what I recommend you should be playing. So I'm not gonna waste much of your time because I have made some videos on this opening. The links are in the card above. Feel free to check them out. But to cut the story short, after bishop c4, the top played move by far is bishop c5 by black. Yep, you'll see some of your opponents responding with knight to f6. We're going to look at that also. By the way, bishop c4 is the Italian game. And so after bishop c5 by black, this is now called the Giuoco Piano or the Giuoco Piano, meaning the silent game. Now from here, I recommend pawn to c3 right away. And it's good to mention that d4 is not the idea here. We just want to let black play knight f6, attacking our e4 pawn, and then we play pawn to d3, which is known as the Giuoco Pianissimo, a very silent game. Now hold on, don't skip this video, because I'm gonna show you something more interesting than this, especially for beginners and intermediate level players. But at the top level, these are the main ideas. So after pawn to d5 by black, here we just take the pawn. Knight f5 is bad due to the highlighted moves, and so knight takes d5 seems to be natural. But queen b3 gives white a huge advantage, and it's nothing that black can do to stop us from winning one of these two pawns, the b7 and the f7 pawn. And so if you are an advanced player facing stronger opponents, these are the ideas I recommend. So anyways, enough of the e4, e5 stuff. Now let's look at how to play against the Sicilian defense. Now before I continue, thank you once again guys for subscribing to my channel. Not to mention that I now have a Patreon page where I post other exclusive content, my secret weapons, some well annotated master PGNs like the one that I'm using in this video, and other fun stuff that will keep you entertained outside the chess world. So be sure to follow me on Patreon. The link is in the description down below. And before I forget, the link for my website is in the description down below, where you can purchase all my courses at very affordable prices. So be sure to visit my website. Okay, let's get back into the video. Okay, so again, pawn to e4, expecting black to play pawn to e5 so that we can play the Giuoco Pianissimo or the Deuce Gambit, but black plays the annoying pawn to c5. Well, these are the ideas that I want to recommend. This is the simple plan. You know, the Sicilian defense is somehow predictable in terms of where black will castle, because it's obvious that black will not castle long. They have already opened up their queen side with pawn to c5, and so it's obvious that they will castle short. And I use these ideas even in classical tournaments. Immediately I see the Sicilian, I start thinking of the early kingside pawn storm, starting with pawn to g4, then h4, g5, etc. So I just gave you one secret of masters. So just remember to start thinking of increasing a lot of pressure on the king side, beginning with g4. So here knight f3 makes sense. After pawn to d6, this is called the modern variation. d4, normal stuff, as if you want to play the Yugoslav attack. I mean, this is how we play the Sicilian defense. So right in this position, after we develop our two knights and the pawn, and black has already developed the knight on f6 and the pawn on d6, it is from here where the Sicilian defense can go different ways. For example, pawn to a6 is called the Najdorf variation. Knight to c6 is called the classical variation. Pawn to e6 is the Scheveningen variation. Pawn to g6 is called the dragon variation. I hate to disclose this to you. My secret here is just to force black to block his light squared bishop by making him play pawn to e6, so that I can quickly play pawn to g4 and g5. Because I know black will castle short anyways, and if black shows me some signs of not wanting to play pawn to e6 anytime soon, I can still go pawn to h3 and g4 with the same ideas. For example, after pawn to e6 in this position, I don't waste any time but to play pawn to g4. I know they are not going to castle long, so let me just start the pawn storm as quickly as possible from the king side. So h6 is what most of my lower rated opponents play. Then here, even though I can go pawn to h4 to prepare for g5, I just go g5 right away. By the way, this has also been played by Judith Polgar, Karpov, Kasparov has played this. This is called the Keres attack. I recommend that you study this opening very well. So h takes g5 is what most of them play. We take back with the bishop, and after knight c6, we just simply play queen d2, planning to castle long next. Queen b6 may be played, posing a double threat on the knight and the pawn on b2. So here I just recommend you go knight b3, and after knight e5, by the way, this is all theory, there's nothing new here, and this is what I recommend that you guys be playing. Black wants to give a check on f3 and also winning your queen, so just play bishop e2, stopping this idea, and after bishop e7 by black preparing to castle short. Here you just castle long. I mean, where is black even going to castle? You have already destroyed the king side. I mean, if they castle short, we have the open g file for our queen's rook, and this h pawn will match up to the h6 square. Things will turn sour. We are going to be celebrating. And if black thinks he can take our free pawn on f2, well, it's game over after bishop b5 check with a discovery on the black queen. So this is what I recommend you should be playing against the Sicilian defense, especially in classical matches. Even in your blitz games, I mean, it's not much of a stretch. And then there's a way I like forcing my opponents to play pawn to e6 right away, e.g. after e4, c5, the Sicilian defense, all normal stuff, d6, d4, pawn takes, knight takes, attacking my e4 pawn. I don't go knight c3, I just simply play bishop c4. This is what I play to force an early pawn to e6 right away. If you don't know what happens after black takes our free pawn on e4, I recommend that you watch this video that has popped up in the card above, so I can guarantee you most of your prepared opponents won't take on e4, they'll play pawn to e6, just covering the f7 pawn. Now our pawn on e4 is surely under attack, so we must develop the knight. And whenever I see pawn to a6, I go bishop b3. If b5, well, that is too late. I can simply play pawn to a3, stopping b4 next, because my e4 pawn was going to be hanging. So bishop e7, preparing to castle short. That's what black does. And after I ensure that there are no threats that can come to my queen side, and also that my e4 pawn is well defended, that's when I play pawn to g4 with the same ideas of the carrier's attack. Because if bishop b7 indirectly attacking my rook on h1, queen e2 is even better. And if h6 stopping pawn to g5, well, the truth is I can still go pawn to g5 with the same idea of opening up the g file and castling long. But there's even a common trap that I wanted to show you guys in this line, where you can actually take on e6, because the logic is that after pawn takes, we take back with a knight attacking the queen, and after something like queen d7, we take another pawn. So we've actually taken 3 of black's pawns for a bishop, which is suffice to win the game. In fact, 3 pawns equals 1 minor piece, theoretically speaking. The ideas are very simple. We'll play pawn to f3, bishop f4, castle long. We also have knight takes on h6 if black goes rook g8. So this is some master level stuff, and I'm showing you all this to appreciate how wonderful you guys have been, and also for subscribing to my channel, and also for buying my courses. Anyway, so these are some of the lines that you should keep in mind whenever you're playing your OTB games and tournaments. Anyways, let's look at how to respond against the French defense. Alright, so we just started with pawn to e4, expecting black to play e5, and then they play pawn to e6, which is the French defense. So let me tell you something with the French. Black knows exactly what he is doing. People who play openings like the French defense and the Caro-Kann defense, they know their theories very well. They've studied some course somewhere, they know a number of lines, they know what to do against the exchange variation. They have some special prep against pawn to e5, and that's why after e6, d4, d5, instead of going pawn to e5, I just recommend that you go with the Positional variation, which is knight c3. Knight d2 is also playable. That is the Tarrasch variation, and it's also worth researching on. But what I recommend here is simply knight c3. I like this move. It's just simple, and it makes most of your French opponents to run out of ideas very quickly. I mean, the first 3 moves that most French players study are e6, d5, c5. Now, after seeing knight c3, the options have now increased, and so they're out of their preparation. Should they play knight f6, bishop b4, or c5? Or simply taking on e4, they don't know. So if they play bishop b4, now here's why I recommend that you go pawn to e5. And seeing this, you're going to see them playing pawn to c5 immediately. That's what they wanted to play at first anyways. And right here, since the bishop is already out, that's when we are supposed to play pawn to a3. By the way, pawn to a3 forces black to give up his bishop right away because there's no good reason for black to retreat his bishop to a5 according to theory. Anyways, clearly you can see that these pawns are coming and there's a problem on e7 because the knight is pinned to the queen, and we're also threatening to take the bishop on c7, which is why it is not really a good idea, theoretically speaking, to go bishop f5. Therefore, you're going to see black taking on c3, after which you take with your b pawn. By the way, if c takes d4, we'll take back with our pawn and still have 3 connected pawns on the center. So black may try to do something else like knight e7. And here, even though we have plenty of options to play, such as queen g4, knight f3, bishop d3, I just suggest that you become aggressive and go with h4, because next you want to go h5. And if black allows, we're going to play h6 and bishop g5, plant our bishop on f6. Life is good all the time. And so black should maybe play pawn to h6. And again, we have plenty of options to play. Our game is very flexible. We can go rook b1, intending to plant our rook on b3. Bishop d3 will come at some point. Provided that we do not allow this fork coming, we are going to play knight f3 and castle short. And at any point, if black plays pawn to f5, we are going to take with n% because we don't want to allow black's pawn to sit on f5 forever. So that's just how to play against the French defense. Very simple stuff. And going back, instead of bishop b4 pinning our knight, black may play something like knight f6. Again, we just go e5. Knight e7 is what they play. We know that black wants to play c5 next. Take our d4 pawn and probably take our e5 pawn in the near future. So we just play pawn to f4, holding on to our e5 pawn, so that even if c5 comes, we don't even get worried. We just develop normally and ensure that we don't have any weakness. Knight f4 attacks the queen, plus defending our pawn on b2. If queen f5 check, we play c3. Our knight is still defended by our queen, and we're also planning to take on c5, for example, if b5. But if c takes d4, this is the only crucial moment to remember. Just don't take on d4 immediately, as your end knight doesn't have better squares to go to. So better play an in-between move, pawn to b4 attacking black's queen, which forces the queen to go back, and only then do we take on d4 with the knight. And after knight takes d4, we take back with our bishop. Again, look at the position. We have stabilized everything. We have no weaknesses. We can play a3, rook c1, castle short, bishop d3. Life is good all the time, and all the time life is good. So that was in the knight f6 variation. Let's go back. Instead of these two moves, if black decides to take on e4, for example, d takes e4, well, here we just be simple, take the pawn. If knight f6, we take the knight. And here theory says black should take with his g pawn, accepting to damage his pawn structure. But that's not what you're going to see your opponents playing. They are going to take with the queen, which is very bad according to Stockfish, because now we are going to take advantage of this queen which is developed so early in the opening. Play bishop d3, and if bishop d6, we play queen e2, preparing to go queen e4. By the way, queen e2 before castling short is very important because it poses a threat of checkmating on h7 right away. And in this position, the only move to play is g6, because if queen g6, we take the queen, and here we are just up a pawn, plus having emerged with a better pawn structure and a better position. Even if black doesn't exchange queens, g6 is equally bad because we can simply take the pawn on h6, attacking the rook on f8. And we have a very decent game from here. So that's what happens if black chooses to play d takes e4 right away. So clearly this is not good for black. So that's why instead of taking on e4, you're going to see pawn to c5, keeping everything in the spirit of the French. But this should be the simplest of all, because we're just going to take all these pawns with our pawns to simplify the game even further. And that's not what French players like. They like closed games on the center. So for example, take on d5 first. E takes d5. We give a check with our bishop. The knight blocks. D takes c5. And now you can see that we are putting more pressure on the d5 pawn. If d4 attacking our knight, we first of all give black a check on e2. If queen e7, we have knight e4 intending to go knight d6 check next, which is why you see them playing bishop e6 blocking the check. So we just go knight f4 defending our pawn which was being attacked by the bishop, and here there's nothing that black can do. For example, s6 is by far the most played move. We just take the knight, and after b takes, we play bishop d2 because black wanted to give a check on f5 and win the knight. So knight f6 by black, knight f3, no more development stuff, bishop e7, castle short, and then we play rook fe1. Are we not having a normal game from here? I mean, the next move we play is b4, pawn to a3. We also have knight b6 coming. What else do you want? Anyway, so this is what happens after pawn to c5 in the Positional variation. Okay, so let's look at the last one against the Caro-Kann defense. Again, you play pawn to e4, expecting black to play e5, and then they play pawn to c6, which is the Caro-Kann defense. By the way, I have a full course on the Caro-Kann defense, how to play the Caro-Kann defense with black pieces. I love this opening. It's something that I would recommend for beginners to learn. It's a non-committal opening, and I've seen great results from my students, so I'm really proud of this course. Anyways, so we still go pawn to d4, cause why not? So d5 by black. Now just like in a French defense, again, Caro-Kann players are well prepared. They know their opening, they've already started their Caro-Kann course which they bought from Kaspa or from any other chess coach, international master, grandmaster, etc. So they are well prepared with moves such as pawn to e5 and pawn takes. So here I just recommend that you play the move knight c3. This is something that most Caro-Kann players don't really pay much attention to when studying their courses. This is simply called the classical variation. The most played move is d takes e4, after which I recommend you take back with your knight, and bishop f5 is what you're going to see, which is officially the classical variation. And here I just want you to be very simple. Just play knight g3 attacking the bishop. Moves are well known. h4 preparing to go h5. They play h6. This is all theory. And here you go knight f3. Knight d7 is what they play, probably stopping your knight e5 ideas. Bishop d3, you exchange bishops, and then they play e6. And so you just play bishop f4, queen f5 check c3. This is the simplest of all. So this is just a line that I would recommend that you guys should be playing. Look at how well developed your pieces are. You are ahead in development, unlike black. So you should be good to go with this opening. And going back, after pawn to d4, d5, knight c3, pawn takes and knight takes, you're going to see some of your opponents playing knight f6. This is called the Tartakov variation, or simply the main line inviting the Tartakov variation. Here I recommend that you just take the knight, and after e takes f6, your plan is very simple. Just develop your bishops on these squares, and the other thing that you need to remember is not to develop your knight on f3 if you want to avoid some unnecessary traps. So you develop your king's knight to e2, for example bishop e3, bishop d6, bishop d3, castle short, and then you develop your knight to e2 instead of f3. This, I can promise you, will save you more time, because the next move that you're going to play is castle short, and whatever black plays, by the way, black wants to sit on f8 with this knight, so just go c4. All your minor pieces are developed, so just make sure you are ahead even with pawns. Knight f8, you play queen c2, and the ideas are very simple. Pawn to c5 will come later on. Pawn to h3, very important, although you should look out for this bishop queen battery along this diagonal. The king's rook will sit on e1, the queen's rook will sit on d1 in most cases. a3, b4, and h3 will come later on. So these are the plans to follow. I don't know if it's very difficult to play against the Caro-Kann defense when you start with knight to c3. Anyways, so this is just my e4 bundle intro. You haven't seen anything. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website. The link is in the description down below, where you can purchase all my courses at very affordable prices. And hey, you can also join me on Patreon. The link for my Patreon page is also in the description down below, where I post exclusive content and other premium videos that I make specifically for my students. There you also have access to my other articles, well annotated master PGNs, and my other corporate things outside the chess world. Alright, so I hope you learned a lot of new stuff from this course, and I hope you did not watch this course at once, cause you're not going to see the results and you will think as if I just wasted your time. I did 80% of the job for you. Now the power to success lies deep in your hands. Your success depends on how well you interpret and apply my teachings, and it's normal to forget some of the lines that we covered, which is why you bought this course, for you to be watching and revising again and again. You can also check out my other courses. I highly recommend to study my Caro-Kann course and also my English opening course if at all you haven't already, cause those courses will also increase your chess understanding and overall know what other players think during their games. Once again, thank you for buying my course and I wish you all the best. Bye bye.